In the last video, we looked at programming languages in general. That is server-side versus client-side. And we talked on very, very high level, if you would. So what I want to do is just show you some very, very simple JavaScript things that you can do. Now, JavaScript is actually a very powerful language. It does have some weird quirks, and if you go on to online forums, you can find thousands of examples of them. But that doesn't mean it's not a useful language. It doesn't mean it's very powerful. What it just means is it sometimes takes a little bit to learn. Now, we're not going to look at learning programming. We're not going to look at complex conditions and loops and how do we send information back and forth between a server and a client. We're just going to look at some really, really simple things. Now, to do that, we're going to use this basic HTML file. This is based off of the Bootstrap template that we had created. There's just a couple of things about it I want to point out. You'll notice I have an H1 tag here. I have a form that has a place to get the first name. Okay, so I want to point that out. And if I go into my code, you're going to notice I have a place for that H1 title, and you have a place for your form with a first name and last name. Right now, the title is actually blank. If I come back here and reload this, you notice it doesn't even show the hello. I just want to have something in there originally so you can see what was there. So let's look at how we're going to write some stuff using some JavaScript. Now, JavaScript and Java are not the same thing. And you sometimes will hear people get confused about it. Trust me, they share a couple of similarities, like the first 4 letters of their name. There's a few other minor things, but not much. So let's look at our very simplest thing that we're going to do with JavaScript. Notice I have a script tag, and I went so far as to say what type of script it was. It's text/JavaScript. This is not required. Your browser will figure it out if you leave off the type attribute. You can either reference an external source with the source attribute, or you can type a script right into here. For what we're going to do, we're just going to type it right in. The first thing we're going to do is just say alert. And I'm going to pass what's called a string. A string is what we see literally inside of our quotes. So I have a set of double quotes here. I'm going to say hello. Save this. Come back to our scripting window. So this just creates a little pop-up window. It just says, this page says hello. Now, nobody likes pop-up windows. So there's number one reason to avoid it. Number two is that most people, if they see a pop-up window, they just click on the OK. They don't read it. So if we have any important information, it's likely to get missed. And the third thing that we want to be careful with using that alert window for is your browser may come and say, hey, this has too many pop-ups. Do you want us to suppress them and ignore them for you? So the browser can even ignore it without the person having to click the OK button. So what is the alert good for? Well, it's good for a lot of times if we're just writing a little bit of code and we need to debug something. There's a slightly better way. Let me show you how to do that, though. So instead of saying alert hello, I'm going to say console.log. And once again, I have some parentheses. Log is what we call a function, or in this case, a method. We're not going to worry about the difference between functions and methods. We'll use those names mostly interchangeably with JavaScript. But we have this method called log. We can pass in a string. So I'm going to say hello here as well. Come back to my browser window, reload. Notice that nothing seemingly happened. Well, what we need to do is right click, and this is in Chrome. If we're using other browsers, it may be slightly different, but since most browsers are Chromium based nowadays, this is pretty standard. And we're going to choose inspect. Now, when we did that, you should notice 2 things. The first of which is, from our previous example, we were looking at it in a mobile device when we inspected elements. So this is showing us our mobile device version. I can click on this little icon over here. That shows like an icon for a phone and a tablet. If I click on that, it goes back to my regular desktop view. The second thing is where that icon was, that's the start of a little information panel, if you would. Now, this has lots of different types of information that we can have. Some of this is specific to some add-ons that I've put on, some extensions. But one of the ones that we're going to look at is called console. And this is found everywhere. And notice that there's our hello. And so the hello is right there in my console. If I reload this window, you notice it clears out my console and boom, there it prints the hello again. And anytime we technically want to write some little debug stuff, this is a more appropriate place to put it. So what we want to do is we want to take that hello message and we want to modify a tag that is on our screen. So what we want to do is take that hello message and instead of putting it in a console window or an alert box that's easily missed, we want to put it and modify our HTML page. To do so, we're going to use and reference a tag that's already on our page. Now you might think, well, how would we do that? Well, if you remember correctly when we started talking about our tags early on, we said most tags have two attributes, an ID and a class. And we talked about classes being very important for styling. IDs are important for scripting because there can only be, or I should say, should only be one tag with the same ID name per page. So if we can reference that specific tag, and JavaScript allows us to do this pretty efficiently, then we get a chance to make changes to that tag. Now, I'm going to leave this console log here, but I can say document dot get element by ID. Now you notice there's some other things I can put in here, like I can get by a name or by a class name or a tag name. So if I want to get all my paragraph tags, I could, but then that's a little bit more challenging and it's not as fast. The IDs are much, much faster. So we want to use IDs if we can. What ID are we going to use? Well, we're going to use the title. You can see up on line 34, that's where I have that ID specified. And then I'm going to say inner HTML, or I could say innerText. These are interchangeable for what we're doing. I'm going to say equals. Notice that I'm not putting inside parentheses here. Okay, this is an attribute. We're going to set it equal to something. I'm going to specify hello. I'm also going to put a semicolon. Now, most people recommend with JavaScript that you put a semicolon. It's not technically required. And the rules around when it is required versus when it's not, it's easier just to put the semicolon. But notice that when we had the console.log, I didn't put it there and it still worked. I'm going to save this, go back to my browser window, reload. Notice I still have my hello in my console window, but now I see my hello up inside of my text. So very, very simple as far as that goes. So this is a really simple thing, but it's a very important thing. The inner HTML allows me to add HTML tags. So I could have put a strong tag in there. I could have added a span or something else if I wanted to. So it gives me a lot of flexibility. And a lot of times if I'm on a div, I could add a whole bunch of other things, titles and articles and paragraph tags and you name it. So that inner HTML is very important. If I have that inner text, all I can do is change the text of my element. It's plain text. I cannot show a tag. So just a little bit of difference in that. Now, let's say I want to get the name inside my text box. And this is real important. For example, I want to check to make sure that something's been entered in. Okay. And come down here. And what I can do is I'm going to write a little bit of code in here just to make this a little bit easier. So what I want to do is write hello in the person's name if there's something in the text box there. If there's not, then I just want to write hello. So how I'm going to do that is, you notice I've kind of cleared out that little JavaScript before, and I'm going to use an if statement. An if statement is a condition. We're going to check to see if something is set. So we're going to say if document dot get element by ID first name dot value. If it's equal to null, then I'm going to say document dot get element by ID title innerText equals hello. Now to test this real quick, what we'll do is come back to our browser window, reload. Notice that we don't see the hello now. It doesn't show up. But if I come back here and delete Joe, you notice it still doesn't show. You might think, well, wait a second. Why did it not show? So if you don't know, null means no data, and there's clearly no data there. Well, yes and no, because JavaScript sees this as an empty string. So I'm going to come down here real quick and say value equals just two quotes. They're just right next to each other. And notice now hello appears. Okay, so it's just a real simple little change. If it's not empty, so there's something in it, we'll say else. We're going to do a little copy paste to make our life easier. Hello, space. We use the plus. Plus is something called concatenation. And then I'm going to specify first name value. Yes, you might have noticed I did some copy and paste, and then I went back and changed it. So I'm going to come back here, put in a name. Okay, so I've got dot value there. Come back here, reload. Now it says hello Mary. It picked up that information for me. So what we want to do is we want to kind of make a little change with this. We're just going to see. This is a great little piece of code, but I want to put it into a function, something that can be called. You'll see why in just a second. So you're going to say function greeting. And I just out of habit, I like to kind of have everything indented so it's nice and clean. This means that it doesn't run unless we call it. So if I save this real quick, reload, notice it doesn't do anything. It's waiting to be called. In order to call it, I have my function name. I define function, greeting. Well, all I have to do is come down here and say greeting. Open and close parentheses, and then my semicolon. And notice it makes the call. Okay, that's easy. That's really nice. But what happens if I change this? Notice it doesn't show up in my hello. That's why we want that function call. So I'm going to come back to my editor. So I can go into my input tag. I'm going to add a new attribute called onChange. You'll notice there's a lot of things that start with on. That's because anytime we make changes, an event is fired and we can capture the event and do something. So like, hey, did I change this? That's a great thing to check. And I'm going to say greeting. And I can give my open and close parenthesis, just like I did before. Don't need to put the semicolon here, but it's going to go call that greeting function. So I'm going to come down here, reload. Notice it says hello Mary. If I delete it, it just says hello. If I come in here and say Bob, it says hello Bob. Now it does specifically look for when I move off of or out of that text box. Okay, so it's not as I'm typing, it's when I tab out of it, when I go to another text field, something else. So this is a nice simple way. Looking for either null or that empty string is also a great way to check to make sure that required fields are entered. And on a form, there's an onSubmit event that we can test for. And so we can do form validation. And that's actually how those validation things occur when you're filling out a form to buy something online or register a product online or register for a new social media account or anything else that you're doing. It's all with those really simple JavaScript commands that you can see like that. I hope this was helpful. Just give you a really high level overview of what JavaScript can do. There's a lot of frameworks out there that make both working with JavaScript a lot easier. So you don't have to specify things like document.getElementById and then all those other things. There's also frameworks that help you do things like dynamically build a web page using a web resource like a REST API or something else. And you can look into things like Node.js as an example or Angular as another example to see how can I work on creating a dynamic interactive web page. If you're more interested in that, you can take a look at those, and there's other classes at Tusculum. We offer 385 that does just that type of thing. Hope you found this informative, and good luck with your programming and your web pages.